And hello everyone, I am your host, the Tater, and this is Quarantine. Let's talk about comic books, specifically the sorry state of the comic book industry today. First, I'll take a step back. I have been reading comics since I was a kid, and for a long time, I considered myself a semi-serious collector. I used to go to my local comic shop every week and spend my spare cash picking up new books or trying to fill in gaps in my collection. To be clear, I was and am primarily a Marvel Comics fan. Most of the DC titles didn't appeal to me, though there were a few exceptions. I was also a big fan of independent comic publishers. All told, though, what is left of my collection only occupies about 6 long boxes. Not a big deal. Though, I will rarely pick up some books now and again out of curiosity. I haven't really felt a need to actually bag and store anything for a long time. Honestly, I'm far more interested in manga now, though I still focus on older and more mainstream titles like Golgo 13 and Ghost in the Shell. To be honest, half the allure there for me has got to do with my actually learning Japanese. Anyway, for the last 20 years or more, comic publishers have relied on an increasingly monopolistic distribution channel, specifically Diamond Comic Distributors. It's no great newsflash to point out that Diamond isn't doing so well at the moment, financially, but in their own death throes, this massive single point of failure is dragging down the entire industry with them. While Marvel can furlough their staff, say pencils down, potentially lay people off and stop running printing presses for a few months, the local comic book shops, run by your stereotypical Simpsons character, still have to make their rent and payroll. The lack of new product in the store is one thing. It might even have been an opportunity to push and finally sell off sludge inventory in their own long boxes. But the fact that people aren't allowed out of their houses to come browse utterly canceled that out. And while I was always someone who preferred to pick my own books every time that I turned up, I recognize that a big portion of the sales that shops do is represented by pull lists. That is, regular customers who have signed up with the shop as a commitment to buy the same titles time and time again, which are then lovingly set aside for them when they arrive so that they can pick them up the next time that they come in. Having regular customers that you can depend on to buy things each churn cycle is the golden calf or holy grail of small business. If you can achieve a regular customer as the owner of a small business, you are winning. Which is why, when Diamond said that they weren't going to be doing the job of actually distributing books, at least for a good while, it was taken on the chin by each and every shop that ultimately is their customer. This is where I take a step back and point out that all of the petulant tweets that come from the production staff of comics, where they actually dump on and insult the fans who actually read the books, have been self-justified by the notion that those people aren't their customers.
I don't care about you! Fuck you!
Marvel Comics doesn't sell to you, they sell to Diamond. Diamond doesn't sell to you either. They sell to the comic shops. You are 2 rungs down the food chain, and as such, there are a lot of very foolish people who think that they don't have to worry about your opinion at all. I call them foolish because it should be evident that they all swim in the same pond and live in the same ecosystem. If you poison the food chain, eventually those toxins will accumulate most densely at the apex of that food chain. To complete the metaphor, these self-styled sharks are full of cancerous tumors. And as it turns out, poisoning the well isn't a good business practice after all. Not unless you've been locked in a salt mine, a prison, or maybe in the Peace Corps for the last 12 years, you've been hard-pressed not to notice the multiple record-shattering billion-dollar-plus earning movies that have come out based on comic books during this time. To be honest, I personally chose the internet over television more than 15 years ago, but still I'm aware of the number of TV shows that have come out that are also based on comic book storylines. Anyone who's ever read a comic of some quality, who knows anything about filmmaking, should immediately understand the potential to use them as ready-made and compelling storyboards. When you combine that aspect with the serialized nature of the stories, making it easy to keep coming back to the well over and over without running out of material, and the built-in audience of people who are familiar with these characters, it is not hard to understand why. With the proper amount of love, respect, and attention devoted to it, these have become tremendously popular.
I'm so popular. Everybody loves me so much.
And that brings us to the new, modern batch of writers and artists that we find at Marvel. I don't want to paint with too broad a brush here, so let me just say hashtag not all, but enough of them to denote a trend. At least seem to be involved in making comics not for the sake of comics, but as a stepping stone to television or films. They don't see comics as a noble end unto itself, but rather something that they have to endure in embarrassment until they can score a better gig. Contempt breeds contempt, and I would hardly be the first person to point out the overall quality both of the writing and the artwork has been in a state of decline resembling free fall. With regards to the artwork, I find this puzzling. For though I'm not someone who can draw anything more advanced than an IT whiteboard diagram or on my best day maybe an XKCD-style comic strip, I know that if I had to, I could lean on 10,001 different technological boilerplate template crutches to help me. But I rarely see that kind of mediocre work. Instead, what I see is increasingly amateurish methods for depicting the human form. Now, in fairness, I don't understand the deadlines that these artists have to deal with. Maybe there's a lot more pressure on them than there was on Jack Kirby, because somehow Jack could draw a hand properly. But the other aspect of change that is universally recognized is politics. And while comics have always been a vehicle for conveying politics, in the past it didn't have such a dramatic impact on the art. Superhero art has traditionally followed the Greek method of depicting idealized and beatific examples of the human form. Humans imbued with supernatural abilities were depicted not unlike statues of Greek gods. But in a post-intersectional, Kyriarchy-obsessed world, there seems to be a compulsion to make superheroes look like regular schlubs. Certainly this has to do with the concept of inclusivity, and equally as certain it does nothing to help sell books. A century of magazine publishing has shown that images of attractive people sell more than those of regular people. With comics, this is perhaps even more crucial to the point because the people that are being depicted aren't real people, but instead they are symbols, and unattractive symbols fail to resonate with their audiences. This brings us, of course, to the writing. Herein lies the heart of the changes that have happened. Now, in my previous video about Star Trek, I bemoaned the problem that plagues many aging sci-fi storylines, the issue of broken canon. And to be truthful and fair, canonical issues have plagued comics forever. I mean, the go-to example usually cited is early Superman comics, where the story of Jimmy Olsen is turning into a werewolf was recycled. The underlying justification being that the audience would have, quote, grown out of comics, end quote, and so the story could be retold to a new generation of fans. But I'm going to take this a step further, much in the same way that Alexander Hillary Kurtzman doesn't give a flying toss if his writing team knows the history of Star Trek. You don't seem to need to know the backstory of any given comic book characters to get a job as a writer at Marvel. And to further get around this problem, both Marvel and DC have, on occasion, rebooted their entire multiverses, including all alternate universes too, just to give their writing staff yet another excuse to be lazy and skip the research phase. I level that accusation of laziness at any writers who define entire characters based on some singular trait, supposedly invoked in this spirit of diversity, but where they actually reduce a person's identity to human with this trait, and tokenize them mercilessly by having them behave in the most stereotypical way possible, rather than simply being a person with their own agency and potentially subverting bigoted assumptions. And one of the titles that I collected from the very beginning was the X-Men. I actually very much enjoyed the nuanced way that the story was actually about something. Whereas Batman was a great detective, Superman was all about fighting the good fight, and the Fantastic Four or the Avengers were about fighting the baddie of the week. The X-Men were clearly using the idea of mutants as an allegory for racism. They were shunned, even by the Avengers. The X-Men were outsiders, and they had to police their own community to maintain the moral high ground and not start yet another race war with humans. Now compare this long-running concept and all the permutations that were developed under the idea to Lady Thor beating up someone for daring to challenge that a woman could be Thor. Completely overlooked the historical nature of Norse mythology as a potential for misunderstanding, or even the idea that in media res, the characters live in a world where a man named Thor actually walked and flew around making a public spectacle of himself. We will have none of that when we can banhammer the patriarchy with Mjolnir. The Star Trek episode Balance of Terror, while borrowing heavily from the film The Enemy Below, was more than a submarine destroyer battle fought in space. At the time that it was made, it was an allegory for the tensions of the Cold War. But the Russians are never mentioned in the episode, and even Chekhov isn't present.
Excuse me, we are looking for nuclear weapons.
The story stands on its own without the historical context, but adding it back makes it a lot more interesting. There is no subtlety in how political messages are delivered in comics today. And there's certainly no room for nuance. It seems more like the clickbait tactics of inspiring outrage to garnish attention are trying to be leveraged as a marketing strategy. But that's assuming that this is actually a business strategy rather than just a side effect of hiring staff from only one side of the political spectrum. So, between terrible writing, a visible decline in art quality or at least appeal, and a single point of failure preventing the actual distribution of the books themselves, the comic book industry is in a very bad way.
We're some real pretty shit now, man!
So, how can it be saved? To begin with, Diamond has come out recently and said that they will start delivering again, perhaps in late May. However, it is clearly necessary to eliminate this chokehold that they have on the earnings of both Marvel and the stores that sell the books. They dropped the ball in the biggest way possible, and do not deserve to reclaim their former position. If anything, they'll be more motivated to promote lock-in and preserve their monopoly. Only maintaining 2 weeks' worth of operating capital is not sound fiscal policy. A lot of people have made suggestions, most of which have been very self-serving. I'm going to propose something that is absolutely controversial, and I fully expect that if anyone emotionally invested in this topic watches this video, they are likely to have strong feelings about it and to potentially roast me alive in the comments. I am for this, and I want to engage with anybody willing to talk about it. We all want basically the same thing in the end, for the industry to reopen again. My idea is this. Since the entire industry is geared around a monopoly distribution model, then I suggest partnering with someone more competent at the task, i.e. Amazon. Now hear me out, because this could be a win for everybody, except Diamond, of course. At this time, there's a lot of talk about going to digital-only distribution. I do not think that I'm alone when I say that this is a bad idea.
The motherload of bad ideas.
Many people, myself included, will simply lose all interest in comics and never buy them again. Given the other problems that I mentioned, it's an act of will sometimes not to do so already. I don't want that. I want a book that I can physically hold in my hand, pile up on my shelf, or be bagged, boxed, and included in a collection. But in the modern world, especially now that it's past the 40-day mark, i.e. the original definition of a quarantine, we rely heavily on things being delivered to your door or mailbox. Amazon started by selling books to begin with. They already sell Marvel graphic novels in digital form through Kindle subscriptions, though I really don't care. Why not replace a cash-strapped company that has bullied shops for years by forcing them to buy titles that they knew wouldn't sell so they could gain access to the ones that do, that shut down for months, putting everyone's livelihood on the line with arguably the most efficient fulfillment and distribution company on Earth? The upsides for Marvel and DC are potentially huge. Aside from how relentlessly easy they make it to transition to working with them, they've kept on delivering all through the pandemic, and they sell globally, making it far easier than the current distribution model to sell internationally. For the casual reader who knows exactly what books they want to read, you could manage your pull list via online subscriptions. For the shop owner, there could be a sliding scale discount based on quantity. The average reader isn't going to buy multiple copies of the same book unless it is some kind of special event. And they aren't going to buy bundled products either. Going back to Marvel and DC, I think pushing garbage onto shops bundled in with good products is a terrible business practice. But if you wanted to, you could sell bundles intended for shop owners. Maybe do both a sliding scale for custom batch orders and a deeper discount when you buy a bundle. Whatever. The hardest hit people in this plan are the shop owners. However, there's clearly a function for those shops. And that function is a place for people to go to peruse new titles. It is their place to generate interest to begin with. They're the ones who celebrate and advocate for comic book culture. This is where new fans are won over, and where people can both discover new things that they haven't seen before, and aren't willing to order blindly, as well as buying back issues. I am not unsympathetic to these small business owners. It might come off like that, or that I'm taking the side of huge corporations over the little guys, but let us speak plainly here. Diamond left you all to die, or at least to starve. This approach will at least give you something to depend on. Will you lose the customer after the first sale when they go home and order it on Amazon? Sometimes. But those people weren't coming back in the store soon again anyway. Depending on the pricing schedules, it might be possible to have the books in the stores be priced slightly cheaper. And that depends heavily on how the publisher wants to treat them. The difference is that Amazon is merely a pass-through rather than Diamond dictating policy. The publishers would no longer be able to hide their aggressive practices behind Diamond. Gmart already makes it possible to subscribe to comics by mail. At a 35% discount last time I checked. Did that cause the stores to go under? I don't think so. I don't know what shipping methods they use, but I imagine it's possible that books wouldn't be in better condition on a store shelf than retrieved from a mailing envelope. I really don't know. For a long time, there were two different versions of comic books available, the kind that went to newsstands and the kind that went to the shops. The difference was the price and the ability to send them back if they didn't sell. Keep in mind that the shipping costs for moving wood pulp are prohibitive, so your newsstand customers would rip the covers off of the books and send those back for full credit. The versions that were sent to comic shops were different, and the sales model was also completely different, including the pricing. These books were not allowed to be returned. Amazon has their own rules about customer satisfaction and returns. I think that it might be an improvement to the existing deal, but most of all, I would like to see more choice afforded to the store owners regarding what they can and want to order without being saddled with a lot of non-selling inventory. Is this business as usual? No. Is it potentially an improvement? I think so. I'd love to know what you think about this hotly debated topic. Am I off base? Out of line? Out of my mind? Well, on that last one anyway, it's possible to be both batshit crazy and correct at the same time, but I do want to hear from you. So if you have an opinion about this, please sound off in the comments. As usual, thank you for listening, and bye for now.